Good morning, Shine Campus. Hope everybody's doing good. Today we're gonna just hang out with coffee. We're not gonna talk about anything. I'm kidding. Um, I want to talk about resolving your argument. And so, what I do know is we'll stick to the topic of being married or in a marriage, but arguments really can happen um, between friends, between parents and children, and the things that I'm going to give you today, if you can translate it for yourself, it's going to be helpful in all of those areas, not just in marriage. But I'm gonna use the concept of marriage to try to help you to have what it is that you need. Okay, so remember the purpose is to resolve the argument, right? And so if we start there, the very first situation that I see happens or that comes across whenever a couple is arguing is that the emotions are super high, right? So it's gotten to a place where either person is probably feeling heard, and it's coming to me. So by the time it's coming to me, like either person is feeling heard, each person has a valid point, and a fat factor for what's going on is we think that we know what the other person is thinking, feeling, and saying, right? Or interacting with. We believe that we know that, and the thing that we have inside of us would change things, or the thing that we know and that we're trying to say would change everything, right? They would just listen. And so that's the first thing, is the emotion is so high and it's starting to create our definitions for us, and that's an issue. So I would say to you, if you're in an argument and you're trying to resolve it, the first thing is to allow your emotions to start to drop a little bit and get to a place where you can do a couple of things that are different. And one of those things is to be able to listen better. And so if emotionally you're not in a place to listen, then you're probably not ready. Um, and and then also, if you can be in a place where you can explain yourself more effectively, then again, if you can't be in a place where you can listen and explain effectively, then you want to get to that emotional space. The idea that I was initially taught was something like a teeter totter. So when your emotions, if this one's emotions is up high, then this one, which is thoughts, is down low. And so you're not thinking the way that you need to be thinking in order to make things happen. And the opposite is true too. Sometimes with, usually I say it with men, but it could happen with either person. Sometimes the thoughts go up high and they're really in their head and they're emotionless and can't be spoken to about things that make emotional and mental sense, right? So we want to be on a balance whenever we're going into an argument. I think that's the first step to being able to resolve an argument. You're too emotionally charged to ever create any resolutions. Even the things that make sense won't make sense to you because your emotions are too high. So that's the first thing, is get on balance emotionally, and with thought, emotion and thought. The second thing is I need you to throw out a definition. The definition that you have right now that's causing you to have an argument um, is this is this cup that I have today is a, it used to be a, I think, a project cup for kids, but my coffee is so hot that it's it's the paint on it is coming off of my finger. Anyways, so I think that the most important part is, if once we balance our thought, is to get rid of that definition. So the definition is, I need somebody else to do something different for me to be okay. Right. So part of our argument isn't just that somebody has something going wrong, right? We're usually not arguing with somebody just because of that. There's a connection between our being and what somebody else is doing, right? Our something's going to happen with our security, with um, our togetherness, our um, our who we are. Like something's going to happen with that thing if this person doesn't change who they are being or what they're saying or how they're doing things or whatever it is, right? And so you have to rid yourself of that definition if you're going to resolve this argument. And so the sentence again is, I need somebody to do something different for me to be okay, right? And if you can get rid of that sentence, then you probably will have replaced it with this sentence. The sentence is, I don't need anybody to do anything different for me to be okay. I need to be the one that makes a difference in my life and makes the changes that I need for me to be okay. So the the idea that you switch that over starts taking out the responsibility of somebody else, which usually we're putting on somebody for them to change our lives or make things different in our life, and that's a heavy responsibility, and it's worth an argument because me being responsible to change somebody else's life and how they feel and what they're feeling is a heavy burden, especially when I'm having a hard time doing that for myself, right? So a lot of arguments come in because of that, and we haven't even hit on like what the specifics are with these first two, right? We haven't said like specifically this is how you resolve this kind of argument, um, but just with those first two, there's already some things that you can start letting go of. Okay. And so one is you're going to clear that space. You're going to make sure your emotions and thoughts are in the same place, or on balance. And then the second one is the idea that you don't need anybody else to do anything different for you to be okay. You have to be the one that does something different for you to create okay. Don't let that change. And the reason why I use marriage today is because one of the things about marriage is there's a commitment level, right? And so don't let that say to you that like, oh, well, then I should just be by myself. No, that's not what that means. I'll go into what it means a little bit, but it's off topic. What that means is that you need to be better at doing yourself before you can help the marriage to get to a different place, right? And so you can't possibly be doing everything that you need to be doing. We're never done, right? And so it's up to you to grow. Matter of fact, you wouldn't even be in the argument if your growth was at a point where you were so focused on creating the person that needs to be in this marriage or this relationship, right? And so, again, that's another topic. But the point is, the idea I want you to get is that it has to be you who says, I have to make the difference in my life. I can't have this other person make the difference. By the way, at the end of that, whenever you get done starting to make the difference and being focused on how you do things, your partner's coming. Like the person you're married to is coming around. They'll be loved because, and love changes that scenario. Again, probably off topic. Staying on topic, you can't be the one to say, I need somebody else to do something different for me to be okay. I have to be the one that does something different for me to be okay. All right. Two huge premises in the beginning. The third thing that I think needs to happen inside of a relationship when there's an argument is we need to be able to say, look, I don't necessarily need to agree with this person. I don't have to agree with this person. And that person doesn't need to agree with me. And just because I don't agree in a scenario, that doesn't mean that I don't approve. I do or do not approve. Um, Let me say that differently. It doesn't mean that I have to necessarily like that situation, or if I agree with it, that means that okay, um, I'm gonna somehow change. I think I'll say it better this way. Acceptance doesn't mean agreement, right? So me accepting what somebody does doesn't say like, okay, I'm going with that or I'm not going with that. So if you could accept that your partner is in a certain place, and we separate out the idea of acceptance and agreement, if you could accept that your partner is in a certain place, um, let's say they say, I really believe the sky is yellow. And for you, you feel like, man, if I accept that, that means that I agree with it. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that, right? So you can say, I accept that you are saying that and that you want that, right? Or that you know that for whatever reason. But that's not where I'm at, right? If we can both get to a point where we can say, look, acceptance doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with something. There's a lot of accepting that we can do in the relationship. In fact, you do that all the time, right? If you love the person that you're with, it's not like you want them to go to work so that you don't see them, right? Maybe some of us sometimes, but for the most part, that's not the goal, right? We'd rather be on vacations, even yourself. Like you don't want to go to work every single day. But what do you do? What do? You accept it every single day. You accept that that's what you might not agree with it, but you accept that that's what you're doing in your life. And so in a smaller scenario, when we're talking about something that we're having an argument about, how do we get to a place of acceptance about whatever the issue is? That that person sees it this way and I see it this way, and I'm going to just accept what it is that they are saying or doing in the relationship. So acceptance does not mean agreement. It helps us to be able to separate out the difference, and because we know the difference, now we don't have to argue until we agree to something, right? Instead, I can change the idea of, look, I'm not looking uh, for agreement anymore. Now I'm just looking to be able to understand, right? So let's that would be the third one: acceptance instead of agreement. Know that rule. The next one is being able to argue in this scenario or in an argument situation differently. What is your purpose of having an argument or this disagreement, right? How do we resolve it? Why change the purpose of it? The reason that I'm arguing initially might be so that I can convince somebody to understand and do something different than what they're doing, right? I'm mad and I'm upset because you're not doing what I want you to do. You're not saying what I want you to say. You're not being who I want you to be. You're not producing what I want you to produce. All of those things create the argument. So, what if I went into conversation or into this conversation rethinking that scenario? And instead of me having a need for that person to be or do something different, I have a need to say, look, I want to draw closer. And so I need to describe what it is that comes up for me. Right. Now, you might think that's semantics, but I don't want it to be semantics for you. I want it to be an internal change that you're doing. Right. So I want you to be able to say, um, I am, I am actually wanting to express what's going on only, but not to convince or change my partner in any way, right? That's not my goal. My goal is to be able to express who I am out loud so that my partner has an opportunity to be who it is that they want to be, fully informed in our relationship, right? And so if you can start thinking that way, and I know that there are different levels of trying to be as a person, and for some people, that scenario that I just described might seem laughable. But for other people who are on a different kind of level, that scenario is very achievable and it's worth pursuing, right? And so I want you guys to think and be at that part where you say, look, that's achievable and it's worth pursuing. And the more you can think like that, the more you can understand in your mind, like, my goal is not to change my partner. In this argument that we're having, there's a lot of things that I'm trying to get my partner to change. There's a lot of things that I want to happen different in my relationship. But I'm moving us backwards if I keep this argument going, right? And so I need to step out of it and do it differently. Okay. So it's a really important internal thing to have that you're going to end up doing externally. All right. So I've given you four, but I think that if we go one more, it'll probably be useful. At the end of the day, um, if you could have an idea of like, what am I doing with this argument? Like, what's actually happening? If you could just stop and think, like, what's the argument creating for your relationship? Is it goodness? Is it the moments that you want with your partner? Is it, um, Is it making you better? Like, what's happening with this argument? And this is a real zoom out scenario, this fifth one here, that I think, if you could understand, it's a really zoomed out experience. Like, what's actually going on in this moment? I'm probably hurting somebody else that I really care about. Um, I'm probably not saying nice things. I'm probably somehow in this conversation making sure that um, I get heard at all costs, and I'm still not being heard. Right? Is there growth really happening in this argument? What's happening here? Right? And I want you to get really intentional about like what happens in your relationship. Like, what are you causing? In this moment, in this argument, what's happening with you? What's happening with your relationship? And if you can start thinking about that instead of like how much somebody is not doing, then everything changes. The hardest thing is you're so embedded in verifying that the person who you're arguing with is not a good person or is not doing good things or is somehow going to harm you. You're embedded in finding that or making sure that that's a scenario so much that you're living it in the moment. You're making sure it gets created. Um, the people that we love, they don't want to hurt us. Ultimately, they might say some hurtful things, they might do hurtful things, but they don't want to hurt us. That's not their goal. Their goal is probably to run away from their hurt more than it is to hurt us. Now that ends up in our hurt maybe, but that's not their initial goal, is not that. And so we need to know love more than anything, right? And so instead of the argument and trying to win the argument, you need to know love more than you know any other scenario. So the challenge is on to be different in that moment. And none of this, none of these steps that I gave you guys say go to your partner and make sure that they know this. Set your boundaries here. And all these things that mean try to control the situation. It's not the situation that causes it. It's the internal of your being that creates the argument that you're participating in, right? What if the other person doesn't want to stop arguing? That's fine. It takes two to argue, right? It takes two to argue. And I think it's up to us to be able to say, look, I love you way too much to have an argument like this. And so, whatever you want to say about the scenario, I'm going to do my best to listen in this moment. And I'm not going to go back and forth about who's right or who's wrong. Instead, I want to really come up with what we need to do to make sure that we have the things that we want to have in our relationship. I want to hear from you. I want to know what's going on from you. I want to be able to share what's going on with me, and I want to be able to share what's inside of me as well, right? So we want to create that kind of environment in the moment. And so if you're able to say that, it's not that we ever got to like how you can actually agree in the argument. Sometimes there are things in our lives that we just will see differently. Sometimes there are things in our lives that mean that we're not on the same page. Sometimes there's things on our lives that it's different season for two different people, and right now it's not the time to really see it the same. And all those things can be possible if we argue differently. Okay, so go back and review the things that you need to in order to do those steps. But it's a huge deal for us to be able to resolve any kind of argument. Okay, all right, you guys take care. Enjoy your Tuesday. We'll talk to you soon.